Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, from the outset, I want to condemn in the strongest possible terms the verbal abuse that continues to be meted out to female members of this House by members of the other side. Mr. Speaker, the disrespect of our women in politics must stop. Mr. Speaker, we have to be determined to develop a better culture in this National Assembly. Calling a female colleague of mine a stripper is unacceptable. It is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker, and it must be condemned. And I'm deeply disappointed that my female colleagues on the other side did not see it fit to upbraid their colleague whilst he abused a female member of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, but I want them to know we're not going anywhere. We're here to stay. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you call us. You are not going to shut us up, and we will continue to be here to represent the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, Guyana's foreign policy, whilst always important, has assumed the place of paramountcy over the last year. One could not, however, tell this based on the delivery by my colleague across the floor yesterday, who spent 25 of his 30 minutes on everything else except foreign affairs. But Mr. Speaker, the world over is changing, a new order is emerging, and in this dynamic landscape of a changing global order, a state's foreign relations stands at the forefront of its strategic directions. Mr. Speaker, as a small country with a small population and a newfound prominence on the world stage as a petro-state, and with a threat to our territorial integrity ever looming, Guyana needs now more than ever a sober, steady, and studied approach to our foreign policy. Amidst this evolving geopolitical current, Mr. Speaker, it is imperative for us as a nation to steadfastly adhere to our bedrock principles while deftly navigating the complexities of this new global order. This delicate balance, Mr. Speaker, demands astute diplomacy and a keen awareness of shifting allegiances and challenges. Because let us be clear, Mr. Speaker, this newfound interest in Guyana is not because of anything that we have done. It is because of what we have. That light, sweet crude that is being pumped 120 miles offshore, even as we speak. But we must remember, Mr. Speaker, that this resource is a finite one. And when it is gone, it is gone. And so, cognizant of this reality, Mr. Speaker, we must soberly and vigilantly navigate these troubling times so that our children and future generations of Guyanese are able to inherit a Guyana great and free. To achieve this objective, Mr. Speaker, I propose 5 urgent priorities that must be addressed in the immediate term. 1, identifying and effectively articulating Guyana's foreign policy, particularly in the context of the protection of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. 2, reshaping and enhancing our relationship with CARICOM countries. 3, employing astute diplomacy. 4, education and training and development of our diplomatic corps. And 5, monitoring international migration into Guyana with particular emphasis on the Venezuelan migration crisis. Identifying and effectively articulating our foreign policy. Mr. Speaker, the aim of foreign policy is to promote the national interest of the state. The maintenance and preservation of Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity is the foremost national interest and must be the #1 objective of our foreign policy. I am not convinced, however, that this government, there were, Mr. Speaker, concurrently with the proceedings before the ICJ, there would have been a sustained effort to keep this matter of Venezuela's spurious claim on the forefront of all of our endeavors. It would have permeated every speech that we give. It would permeate every presentation that we make internationally. And we would be actively building alliances with groupings and states that could lend support to us. Mr. Speaker, This just in time and for the moment approach has to stop. It must end. Mr. Speaker, the protection of our territorial integrity requires eternal vigilance. Guyanese are well aware of that photograph of a CARICOM leader standing with a map of Venezuela, which included our Essequibo. This matter caused serious outrage, Mr. Speaker, and understandably so. But what is even more worrisome for me, Mr. Speaker, is that this photograph, along with an accompanying article written by one Ennio Malin, was published on the website of Venezuela's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in December 21 of 2022. Mr. Speaker, this question necessarily arises, therefore, who is monitoring the Venezuelan Ministry of Foreign Affairs website and communications on our behalf? Did they not see this photograph? And if they did they bring it to the attention of Tacuba Lodge? And if Tacuba Lodge was made aware, why was not there a diplomatic protest to that particular CARICOM leader? Mr. Speaker, and if they were aware as well, why did they not consider this sufficient cause for pause in agreeing to that said CARICOM leader being an interlocutor in this Guyana-Venezuela controversy? Mr. Speaker, these are legitimate questions, and Guyanese deserve answers. Mr. Speaker, it is time that this government proffers to this nation a well thought out and well articulated foreign policy, which will provide the roadmap for our engagement with the world. One that aligns our national interests, values, and goals, and offers a coherent and strategic approach to navigating the complexities of this new international order. To this end, Mr. Speaker, we would propose the establishment of a Foreign Relations Council. Such a council would comprise our best minds across academia, foreign service professionals, civil society, and other professions, and would have the mandate to continuously review Guyana's foreign policy. In this manner, Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that our foreign policy positions are well thought out, well articulated, as would be the case in any properly functioning democracy. It must not be at the whims and fancies of individuals who are bent on furthering partisan interests. Mr. Speaker, reshaping and enhancing our relationship with CARICOM countries. Sir, the events of the last few months have indicated the clear need for us to engage with CARICOM in a more sustained manner. It is to be recalled that it is Guyana, under the visionary leadership of Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, who had the foresight to understand that as a region, we either integrated or we would perish. And thusly, we became a founding member of CARICOM and a driving force behind regional integration. Mr. Speaker, it has to be recalled as well that it was in response to Guyana's strength and stature in CARICOM that Venezuela established a foreign policy position to disrupt Guyana's influence and relationships within CARICOM. And these resulted in initiatives such as the Petro-Caribe. Mr. Speaker, we strongly recommend that without delay, we have envoys actively working in the capitals of CARICOM member states, representing our interests and providing regular feedback to Tacuba Lodge. Guyana must never, Mr. Speaker, have to urge unequivocal statements of support from CARICOM leaders. Mr. Speaker, it is regrettable that the High Commission in Trinidad and Tobago, established under the David Granger-led administration in 2017, has been downgraded to a consulate. The stated objective of establishing this High Commission was explained by then Foreign Minister, the Honorable Carl Greenidge, and it was, I quote, "with the strengthening and deepening of our bilateral relations with Trinidad and Tobago, as well as furthering our bilateral ties with the other island states of the Caribbean community." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, I urge this government not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but appreciate the strategic importance of a High Commission in Trinidad and Tobago and forthwith reestablish same. Mr. Speaker, I am strongly of the view that the deficient Argyle Declaration is the reflection of our failure to continuously engage with CARICOM. And whilst Guyana welcomes the undertaking by Venezuela not to use force against Guyana, it must be noted, sir, that as we speak, Venezuela is proceeding with the passage of their organic law for the defense of what they call the Guyana Essequibo. In direct violation of this Argyle Agreement. Where is the outrage? Mr. Speaker, Venezuela continues to distribute maps with our Essequibo included in it, and there is deafening silence. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President has assumed the chairmanship of CARICOM, and I know that regional food security is high on the agenda. And we agree, Mr. Speaker, that Guyana does have the ability to lead the way in this regard and can truly become the breadbasket of the Caribbean. But I want to submit to us here today, Mr. Speaker, that Guyana must first become the breadbasket for Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, at the moment it is not. According to the Caribbean Food Security and Livelihood Survey, which was published in January 2023, it is estimated that 56% of Guyanese are moderately or severely food insecure, which is higher than the regional average. I ask this government then, how are Guyanese to play a meaningful role in the development of this country when they have to worry day in and day out, Mr. Speaker, about what they will eat? Guyanese have to worry day in, day out about what they will eat. 56% of Guyanese, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Guyana are our most precious resource, and they must be the center of any developmental strategy. So, Mr. Speaker, when the Vice President accuses us of only wanting to feed the people of Guyana, we proudly say guilty as charged. Mr. Speaker, the people-centered approach to the development of Guyana that the APNUAFC continues to adumbrate will see Guyanese being able to feed, clothe, and house themselves, and will culminate in the good life that every son and daughter of this land is entitled to, and which is only possible with this APNUAFC coalition. Employing astute diplomacy. Mr. Speaker, diplomacy is the vehicle through which a state advances its foreign policy. And while diplomacy is this broad concept that encompasses the general practice of international relations, we now must necessarily go one step further. We must employ astute diplomacy. Astute diplomacy, sir, involves a higher level of skill, of strategic thinking and adaptability, and will allow us as a nation to navigate the complexities of the global stage with a more nuanced and effective approach. It goes beyond routine interaction, Mr. Speaker, to include an insightful and strategic decision-making in pursuit of our national interests. To this end, Mr. Speaker, we urgently need to examine our representation at foreign capitals. It is inconceivable that 4 years into this new government, we are yet to appoint an ambassador to Brazil. Brazil, Mr. Speaker, our strongest ally and a member of BRICS, our strongest continental ally and a member of BRICS, Mr. Speaker. We have not yet appointed an ambassador to Brazil. Mr. Speaker, the slot in this regard is completely unacceptable and it must be remedied forthwith. Mr. Speaker, it is also unacceptable that we have no missions in Africa save and except South Africa. And this is but a consulate, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, Venezuela continues to court African states individually and collectively. Mr. Speaker, since the disastrous departure of the High Commissioner from New Delhi, we have yet to appoint a new High Commissioner, and we have no high-level representation in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, in Russia, in Switzerland, Belgium, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Suriname. Mr. Speaker, we also need to examine our approach to international economic cooperation. Mr. Speaker, The European Union has been Guyana's major development partner since 1975 under successive ACP, EU, Lomé, and Cotonou Partnership Agreements. In November of 2023 in Samoa, the member states of the Organization of African and Pacific States, a collection of 79 states, sir, and the European Union signed the Samoa Partnership Agreement. And this agreement, sir, would govern relations between the two groups for the next 20 years in the first instance. Mr. Speaker, the provisional application of this agreement commenced on January 1. And Mr. Speaker, despite Guyana, in the person of Mr. Carl Greenwich, playing a leading role in the negotiation of this new agreement, Guyana was neither represented at the signing of the agreement, and today it has not signed the agreement. Our not signing on to this agreement, Mr. Speaker, means that we will be severely limited in the scope for cooperation with the EU. Mr. Speaker, it also robs us of a very important forum, 7 to 9 states, a very important forum for us to canvass our support against Venezuela's illegal claim. Mr. Speaker, astute diplomacy demands that we seize every opportunity to maximize membership of these international agreements and further the interests of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, education and training and development of our diplomatic corps. Mr. Speaker, a corps of knowledgeable and committed diplomats is an indispensable prerequisite for executing the astute diplomacy that I described above. When the APNUAFC re-established the Foreign Service Institute in February of 2020, it was with this vision in mind. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that this government has allocated only an approximately $11 million for training in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What this essentially means, Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Services Institute will continue to operate as a clearinghouse for opportunities provided by other governments for the training of our foreign service personnel, which in many instances, sir, are not tailored to our specific needs. Mr. Speaker, it does not have to be this way. Under an APNUAFC-led administration, the Foreign Services Institute will be a well-funded, well-resourced entity capable of offering a culturally responsive, world-class postgraduate education to our foreign service personnel. 5, monitoring international migration into Guyana with particular emphasis on the impact of the Venezuelan migration crisis. Mr. Speaker, Guyana continues to grapple with the burgeoning migration crisis, particularly as it relates to migrants from Venezuela. It is settled that migrant overflow can lead to economic and social crisis, negatively impacting the actual citizens of the country. It is being felt here in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. It's being felt in overcrowded classrooms and hospitals. Mr. Speaker, according to the IOM Guyana Needs Assessment Report published in 2021, in 2020, there was an estimated 22,000 Venezuelan migrants in Guyana, with only about 11,000 of that number being in regular migration status. That is properly documented and accounted for. Mr. Speaker, we know for a fact that in 2024, that number is at least 4 times that amount. It therefore means that if this trend holds, we are safe in assuming that there are tens of thousands of undocumented Venezuelan migrants here in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we are in a crisis. And instead of understanding, sir, the long-term implications of this unchecked migration into Guyana, the long-term implications for Guyana's territorial integrity, the PPPC government continues to adopt a myopic approach, preferring to use this crisis instead, Mr. Speaker, for their own narrow political gain. Mr. Speaker, instead of getting down to the real work of crafting a sound migration policy for Guyana, this PPPC government prefers to spend its time painting the APNU-FC coalition as anti the Venezuelan migrants. Let me be clear, Mr. Speaker, that unlike the PPPC government that continues to discriminate against our Haitian brothers and sisters in clear breach of our obligations under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, we are not anti-Venezuelan or any other migrant. We are pro-law and order. And I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker. Very, very clear, because I've said it before and I've said it again. No migrant who comes into Guyana in keeping with the laws of our land and whilst here continues to abide by the laws of Guyana will have anything to fear from an APNU-AFC government. Mr. Speaker, it is apparent that this government does not see the crafting of a migration policy for Guyana as urgent or important. In February of 2021, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched a project to develop a migration profile for Guyana. This project, which will provide critical data for the formulation of a migration policy, was slated to be concluded at the end of 2022. We are now in 2024, and this critical project is languishing. But we on this side of the house, we understand that the PPPC administration has a deep and abiding resentment for studies and decision-driven, data-driven decision-making, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the next APNU-AFC government will craft a sound migration policy for Guyana, one that is comprehensive but flexible, addressing the economic, social, environmental, and cultural aspects to promote sustainable development and enhance the well-being of both our citizens and newcomers. But we must be clear about something, Mr. Speaker. The APNU government will be unapologetic about putting Guyanese first. The wealth of this land first belongs to Guyanese. Every Guyanese man, woman, and child. We will take care of them first. And we will be happy, sir, to share the bounty from the overflow with the rest of the world. Mr. Speaker, having identified these 5 urgent priorities that we must address to right our badly listed foreign policy ship, I will use my remaining time to make a few observations about this $1 trillion budget. But first, Mr. Speaker, I want to make one observation on international trade. Mr. Speaker, a major lifeblood of our economy is international trade. As a country that relies heavily on foreign trade, we must be concerned as to what the changes in our economy mean for the acquisition and distribution of foreign currency. Mr. Speaker, the new concentration of our economy reveals that 2 industries, oil and gold, generated 94% of our foreign policy or of our foreign currency earnings in 2023. According to the existing data, one can envisage oil exceeding the 90% share of foreign earnings, Mr. Speaker, that it was responsible for in 2023 in the not too distant future. While this government, sir, basks as a country in the financial glow of the oil industry, one has to wonder what the current policy on the management and use of foreign generated earnings might be playing in determining our access to foreign currency for our business community and the wider society. Mr. Speaker, shortage of foreign currency should not abound in a country where export revenues have grown over 700% in less than 4 years and its trade balance to a surplus of over $6.5 billion. It should not happen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our public servants, Mr. Speaker, the public servants of Guyana play a vital role in fostering the well-being and development of our society by dedicating their expertise and energies to delivering essential services, to upholding justice, and to ensuring the efficient functioning of our government institutions. They keep the wheels of this country turning. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, our hard-working public servants in this oil-rich country will get the benefit of approximately 1.88% of the money this country will earn. And this is after accounting, of course, for the projected inflation of 2.5%. Mr. Speaker, this indicates a real decline. It indicates a decline in real income from public servants, contrasting starkly, sir, with the progressive yearly rise that they enjoyed from 2015 to 2019 under the AP and UAFC government. Mr. Speaker, every year from 2021, the real income of our workers has gone down. Mr. Speaker, I want us to examine the transfers that Guyanese, including public servants, will receive under the various handout packages announced by this government. In 2024, the government plans to give Guyanese 1.44% of this country's oil wealth to supplement their income. These are the monies that will go directly to school children, to teachers, to youths, to pensioners, and to those dependent on public assistance, and as well as those business ventures. And this will be done either through cash vouchers, or other forms of transfer. Mr. Speaker, when public servants' incomes are combined, and I want you to hear this, Mr. Speaker, when public servants' incomes are combined with the supposed generosity of this government, they would have gained access to a mere 3% of the 2024 income for this country. 3%, Mr. Speaker. It is therefore very, very understandable why the people of Guyana place more emphasis on remittances, which at 5% of the 2024 GDP, sir, will exceed the entire earnings and grants public servants will receive from this PPPC government. Mr. Speaker, in other words, what I am saying is that despite this $1 trillion budget, Guyanese are surviving because of the monies being sent to them by their relatives overseas. What an embarrassment. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn our minds to the PSIP rather. Mr. Speaker, year after year, we continue to point out that the local capacity does not exist to execute the ever-increasing public sector investment program. And Mr. Speaker, it continues to get worse. Execution capacity within the public sector has not experienced any intervention for improvement over the last 3 years. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the brain drain continues unabated. What this means, sir, essentially, is that because there has been no sustained effort or no effort at all to improve our efficiency, it means that as the budget grows, wastage also grows. Mr. Speaker, 3 years ago, we showed in this House how with the smallest of adjustments, the PPPC government could give the public servants, among other things, a 10% increase and free education for the thousands of university students who are enrolled in the University of Guyana today. Mr. Speaker, the position as we stand here today remains the same, that with the minutest of adjustments in the public sector investment program, public servants could enjoy a 10% salary increase. We could afford free university education right now, Mr. Speaker. We could incentivize, Mr. Speaker, our nurses and our doctors to remain here instead of, Mr. Speaker, coming to this House to boast. Let them go. We will bring in other nurses, Mr. Speaker. This government simply does not care about the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the reality is, however, Mr. Speaker, the reality, however, is that no matter how much we stand here and deliver the facts and dissect this budget and show how with just such little effort we can make the lives of Guyanese better. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't matter how much the international organizations speak. This government will not listen because they are stiff-necked. Mr. Speaker, and because they are stiff-necked, I will not spend the rest of this budget presentation speaking to them. Mr. Speaker, instead I will speak to the people of Guyana, because it is the people of Guyana who hold the ultimate power. And so I say, fellow Guyanese, the reality is that you have two visions before you for our country. One vision consists of raiding the Natural Resources Fund, racking up a mountain of debt which our children will have to be repaid, spending a record 58% of the budget on physical infrastructure without even attempting to close the horrific efficiency gap, which means that 41% of the total capital expenditure, or $273 billion, will be wasted. Imagine what $273 billion could do in your pocket. The vision of this PPPC government is one that, despite knowing that the World Economic Forum has concluded that the cost of living crisis is the biggest global risk in the short term, would see them setting aside a measly $7 billion to assist Guyanese with weathering these rough times. Their vision.
Remember, to weather the conclusion, you need 5 minutes.
Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Honourable member, you have 5 minutes to conclude.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, the vision of this PPPC government is to implement the largest wealth transfer in Guyana's history, transferring trillions of dollars from the hard-working people to a handful of no more than 20 families. Their vision will see the continued undermining of our institutions, the dismantling of the guardrails of our democracy, and the suppression of dissenting views. Their vision, Mr. Speaker, is to do all of this and then use their PR machinery funded by taxpayers' dollars to gaslight the people of Guyana, telling us that down is up and left is right. But, Mr. Speaker, there is another vision. There is another vision. The vision of the APNU-AFC. And, Mr. Speaker, our vision with the people of Guyana at its center sees a Guyana where the Guyanese spirit is strengthened and national unity is fostered and patriotism is perpetually promoted. Our vision sees a Guyana where no Guyanese man, woman, or child will ever go hungry, because we will implement a needs-based food voucher program for low-income and no-income Guyanese. Our vision, sir, sees a Guyana where parents will not have to worry about affording transportation for their children to attend school, because we will implement a needs-based transportation voucher system for our children. Mr. Speaker, our vision sees a Guyana with free education from nursery to university for all Guyanese, and will see the University of Guyana receiving adequate funding to increase its talent pool, to enhance its talent, and to increase research and drive innovation. Mr. Speaker, in our vision, no public servant will earn less than $150,000 per month. And we will work with the private sector to close the minimum wage gap between the public and private sectors. In our Guyana, Mr. Speaker, capital expenditure will only occur after a professional examination of the needs and an examination of our capacity to effectively implement these projects. Mr. Speaker, in an APNU-AFC-led Guyana, healthcare delivery will be revolutionized because we will focus on the delivery of primary health care and on preventative health care instead of allowing our populations to fall sick and then building hospitals to hospitalize them in. Mr. Speaker, we will focus on retaining our doctors and our nurses. Mr. Speaker, our vision will make Guyana the breadbasket for Guyanese and for the Caribbean, because we will invest in agriculture and we will champion the growth of the non-oil sector. Mr. Speaker, our vision for Guyana will reverse the dreaded oil curse. Mr. Speaker, our vision for Guyana will see a professional government with professional government agencies and interventions necessary to improve efficiency. Mr. Speaker, this will include the re-establishment of a public service training institute. In this Guyana, we envision, Mr. Speaker, that Guyanese will know that agencies such as the Guyana Police Force are actually there to protect and serve them, and not to serve the dictates of the political classes and the elite. Mr. Speaker, I want to break it down for us so that it will consistently and forever be broke. The PPPC is bad for Guyana. They are bad for the people of Guyana. They are bad for business. They are only good for their elite friends and family. This PPPC government, Mr. Speaker, is constructing the early makings of a failed state, and they must be stopped. Mr. Speaker, the AFC coalition is better. We are better for Guyana. We are better for the people of Guyana because we are committed to a strong democracy. And we place the people of Guyana at the center of our development strategy. Not sand, not cement, not stone. Mr. Speaker, for all of the foregoing reasons, and while I am deeply appreciative of the work done by our staff at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I cannot support the 2024 budget, rather, as it has been presented to this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.